Kirk to Rayborn, report. I'm required to make a security confirmation. When I call my ship, if you list your personnel, cargo requirements, any special needs.
Science fiction has always served as a powerful medium for exploring what humanity might become. And no franchise has wielded this tool quite like Star Trek. Since its debut in 1966, the series has pushed boundaries, challenged conventions, and asked difficult questions about morality, society, and our future. Yet, this very willingness to explore controversial territory has resulted in numerous episodes being banned, restricted, or heavily censored across different countries and networks. What many viewers don't realize is that some of these episodes remain off the air decades after their initial broadcast, deemed too disturbing, too provocative, or simply too ahead of their time for mainstream audiences to handle. Today, we're examining 3 particular Star Trek episodes that crossed lines their creators likely anticipated, but networks absolutely did not. Understanding why these episodes were banished from the airwaves tells us something profound about how society views entertainment, morality, and what we're willing to confront on our television screens. Before diving into the specific episodes that face censorship, it's important to understand what made Star Trek so controversial in the first place. Creator Gene Roddenberry envisioned a series that would use the safe distance of alien worlds and futuristic settings to discuss the pressing social issues of his era. The Vietnam War raged, the civil rights movement was reshaping American society, and questions about humanity's future loomed large in the cultural consciousness. Roddenberry deliberately crafted Star Trek as a vehicle for exploring these themes without direct confrontation. By placing moral dilemmas on distant planets, with beings who didn't quite resemble humans, he could discuss racism, war, sexuality, and mental health in ways that seemed abstract but were unmistakably relevant to contemporary debates. This approach was revolutionary, but also dangerous from a network perspective. NBC executives who approved the series for production didn't initially grasp the deeper implications of Roddenberry's vision. They saw a space adventure show with decent special effects and an ensemble cast. What they got was a Trojan horse for progressive ideas. The original series was groundbreaking in its casting alone, featuring Asian, Russian, and African-American characters as equal members of the crew during a period when such representation was virtually unheard of in mainstream television. Yet even this progressive vision had limits. Networks and broadcast standards would eventually draw lines in the sand, declaring certain stories too risky for their audiences. Some episodes would never fully recover from that initial censure. The first episode that demands our attention is Miri, an original series installment that aired in 1966. On the surface, this episode presents as a straightforward mystery. The USS Enterprise receives a distress signal from a planet that appears to be an exact duplicate of Earth. When Captain Kirk and his landing party investigate, they discover an eerie, abandoned town where something has gone catastrophically wrong. All the adults have vanished, leaving behind only children who have adapted to a harsh new reality. What makes Miri deeply unsettling is its exploration of lost childhood and societal collapse. The children, led by a girl named Miri, initially seem innocent and vulnerable. However, as the episode progresses, viewers witness these children transforming into something far darker. The crew discovers that the planet's inhabitants had discovered a method for extending human life indefinitely, but the serum went tragically wrong. Everyone who reached adulthood and received the treatment became violently insane, leading to their deaths. The children, who cannot age past puberty due to the flawed formula, have survived for centuries in a state of perpetual childhood. Yet this eternal youth comes with a terrible cost. They remain psychologically trapped in childhood behaviors while possessing the cunning and desperation of survivors. The episode takes a horrifying turn when the landing party realizes they've contracted the same disease. Purple discoloration marks the beginning of the infection, and they know from the children's testimony what comes next: madness, brutality, and death. As Kirk and his team race to develop a cure, Miri and her peers turn on them, driven by fear and a disturbing logic that prioritizes their own survival. The children become a mob, attacking the adults with a violence that undermines the innocent facade. The episode forces viewers to confront an uncomfortable truth. Children are not inherently pure or good. Given the right circumstances, desperation can corrupt them as thoroughly as anyone else. The BBC aired Miri only once, in 1970, and immediately received complaints. The episode was deemed too psychologically disturbing for repeat broadcasts. The combination of children acting violently toward adults, the grotesque imagery of the plague's physical manifestations, and the overall bleakness of the scenario proved too much for broadcasters who wanted science fiction to remain safely in the realm of adventure rather than horror. The episode challenged viewers' assumptions about childhood innocence and societal collapse in ways that felt less like speculative fiction and more like genuine nightmare material. Even today, Miri retains its power to unsettle because it refuses to sentimentalize its young characters or offer easy redemption. While Miri disturbed audiences with its psychological horror, the second episode on our list pushed a different kind of boundary altogether. Plato's Stepchildren became famous or infamous for a single scene that would reshape television history. In this episode, Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura are captured by a society of godlike beings who model themselves after ancient Greek civilization. These beings possess tremendous telekinetic powers and use them to torment their captives, forcing Kirk and Uhura to humiliate themselves for entertainment. The moment that changed everything came when these beings forced Kirk and Uhura to move toward each other and embrace in what became the first openly scripted interracial kiss broadcast on American television. For approximately 4 seconds, a white man and a black woman shared a romantic moment on primetime television. To modern viewers, this seems almost incomprehensibly tame. Yet in 1968, the year this episode aired, such an image was considered explosively controversial in large portions of the United States. Many Southern television stations had to consult with their executives about whether broadcasting this moment would violate standards of decency or spark violent reactions from viewers. What's particularly interesting about the controversy surrounding Plato's Stepchildren is how it reveals the disconnect between network fears and actual audience response. NBC worried extensively about how viewers would react, particularly in the Deep South, where racial attitudes remained staunchly segregationist in many communities. Yet the expected backlash largely failed to materialize. American audiences proved more progressive than their corporate gatekeepers anticipated. However, the same could not be said internationally. The BBC, which carried Star Trek in the United Kingdom, refused to air the episode at all. The official justification provided was that the episode contained excessively brutal content. Yet most observers understood the real concern was the interracial kiss itself. Airing such content would risk offending conservative British viewers or creating international incidents. Plato's Stepchildren represents a peculiar kind of censorship, one driven not by what actually offends people, but by what institutions assumed would offend people. This episode remained banned in various markets for years, not because it had been universally condemned, but because broadcasters decided unilaterally that certain segments of their audience couldn't handle it. The tragedy is that this decision prevented the episode from reaching precisely those viewers who might have benefited most from seeing it. In many ways, the banning of this episode reveals more about the fears of institutions than the actual values of viewers. The third episode that demands examination is Whom Gods Destroy, another original series installment that ventured into deeply disturbing psychological territory. This episode begins innocuously enough. The Enterprise is assigned to deliver medical supplies to a high-security facility for the criminally insane on a remote planet called Elba-2. The facility's location and classification suggest it houses the Federation's most dangerous and unstable individuals. However, what the crew finds when they arrive is far worse than anticipated. The patients have staged a rebellion and taken control of the facility. Their leader is Garth of Azar, a once celebrated Starfleet captain whose mind has fractured into something far more dangerous. Garth suffers from severe mental illness, including a god complex and a capability that makes him terrifyingly unpredictable. He can shapeshift, copying the appearance of anyone around him. Throughout the episode, Garth manipulates everyone through psychological torment. He plays cruel games, makes arbitrary decisions that cost lives, and seems to revel in chaos and suffering. At one point, he casually executes another inmate simply to demonstrate his power, not out of necessity, but pure. What makes Whom Gods Destroy particularly disturbing is how it portrays mental illness not as something to sympathize with or understand, but as a genuine threat that requires containment and suppression. Garth isn't presented as a victim of his condition. He's presented as a monster whose illness has unleashed something irredeemably dangerous. The episode doesn't explore the roots of his breakdown or suggest any path to recovery. Instead, it emphasizes the terror of being around someone whose grip on reality has fundamentally shattered. For Kirk and Spock, the danger isn't just physical. It's the psychological warfare of never knowing whom they can trust when their adversary can copy their appearance. The BBC eventually decided this episode crossed too many lines for family television. The combination of violence, psychological manipulation, casual brutality, and the sheer instability at the episode's core made it too dark for their broadcast standards. The network determined that younger viewers shouldn't be exposed to such an unflinching portrayal of mental illness as danger, even if the episode was science fiction. The decision reflected both genuine concerns about content and perhaps a discomfort with having serious mental health issues discussed on television at all. The common thread connecting these three episodes is that they refuse to sanitize difficult subjects. Miri showed childhood corruption. Plato's Stepchildren challenged racial barriers in representation, and Whom Gods Destroy portrayed mental illness as genuinely frightening. Networks and broadcasters felt these topics were too volatile, too unsettling, or too provocative for their audiences. The fact that these episodes were banned, and in some cases remain unavailable or heavily edited decades later, speaks volumes about institutional anxiety over social issues. It's worth noting that Star Trek's willingness to push boundaries wasn't limited to these three episodes. Throughout the original series and subsequent iterations, the franchise has consistently tackled controversial material. Yet not all controversial content receives the same treatment. An episode discussing philosophy or political systems might provoke debate without facing censorship. But episodes that combine difficult subjects with graphic content, disturbing imagery, or challenges to social norms face genuine institutional resistance. The banning of these 3-star Trek episodes and several others reveals a fundamental truth about the relationship between entertainment and society. Television networks don't simply reflect audience values, they actively police them, deciding what citizens are capable of handling. In many cases, this caution has proven misguided. Modern audiences can readily engage with the very content that once seemed too dangerous. Plato's Stepchildren's interracial kiss, once considered potentially explosive, is now recognized as a historic moment in television's progress toward representation. Miri's psychological darkness is seen as sophisticated storytelling rather than child exploitation. Whom Gods Destroy's unflinching portrayal of mental illness is recognized as creating necessary dialogue rather than dangerous propaganda. These banned episodes remind us that censorship often says more about the institutions wielding the scissors than about the actual content. Star Trek created space for discussing humanity's future, our social challenges, and our deepest fears. Some episodes crossed lines that made audiences and broadcasters genuinely uncomfortable. Rather than dismissing these discomforts, we might ask whether discomfort itself isn't sometimes exactly what powerful television should provoke. The fact that these episodes remain controversial decades later suggests they contain something meaningful, something that continued to matter even after the specific social circumstances that prompted their banning had evolved. Like, subscribe, and follow for more.